I bought a Chanel bag a couple of years ago, which was the biggest purchase I had made on an unnecessary item at that time in my life. It wasn't an impulse purchase. I had spent probably hundreds of hours over the course of 2 to 3 years considering and researching this purchase. I was looking for something very specific, so on the day that I bought it, I was so happy. I was very giddy. And the next day I woke up thinking like, wow, I have a Chanel bag. And the day after that, I was still happy about the purchase, but the feeling was like notably not as strong. And by the 2-week mark, I wasn't even thinking about the bag anymore. I often heard the message growing up that material things don't make us happy. And the funny thing is, I found that I needed the experience of spending thousands of dollars on a bag to really learn this lesson. And honestly, a part of me thought like, if anything would make me happy at that time in my life, it would be a Chanel bag. And that's just given how much consideration and literally years of anticipation I had put into that purchase. I think it was probably through that experience that I learned that buying things to make me happy would never be sustainable. Because basically 1 month into owning that bag, after years of buildup, I barely even thought about that bag, much less with the same fuzzy feelings as when I first got it. I also realized that yes, technically I could afford to spend an extra few hundred or a few thousands of dollars on these like fun purchases every month or every couple of months if I wanted to. And certainly that was a one-time purchase, but if I kept buying things to upgrade my life or to make me happy, I would be caught on a hedonistic treadmill searching for that constant dopamine hit. And that cycle would never allow me to be independent from my job, aka achieve financial freedom. And shortly after buying that Chanel bag, I started my low buy lifestyle. And once I started, I pretty much very quickly lost my desire for a lot of material things that would have piqued my interest in the past. So today I'm going to dive deeper into how I shifted my mindset around consumption and instead prioritized a low buy lifestyle. That shift ultimately gave me the confidence to quit my job. I'll talk through how I cut down on my consumption expenses, particularly around like social eating and drinking habits. And I'll also touch on how I cut down expenses around material items. I'll also share my challenges in my low buy year, but I would say ultimately living with less led to a simpler and easier life for me. By the way, if you're new here, I'm Carly, and on this channel, I mainly talk about consumerism and financial literacy. So if you're interested in any of those topics, go ahead and subscribe and ring the notification bell. I will say, before I embarked on my low buy experience, I had always been quite intentional about spending money. I didn't spend my money often, but I was always willing to pay a premium to experience the best option I could afford. So that looked like the best restaurant in a category of cuisine or the best brand in a category of items. And so when I was thinking about cutting out my extraneous spending, I realized that I didn't really feel the need to spend money in certain areas anymore, particularly when it came to food or drinks, because to me, I had already experienced some of the best food in the most common cuisines. And because of that, I didn't need to spend money eating something that probably wouldn't come close to an amazing experience I had already had in the past. And I feel like this mindset really helped me cut down on randomly ordering takeout or randomly going out to eat if it wasn't a special occasion. I found that as long as I wasn't traveling or exploring a new place, I didn't really feel the need to spend money eating out all that much. And that's because I was already happy with what I had experienced in the past. And then when I further broke down my consumable expenses, I realized that my consumption habits revolved around social scenarios. I often caught up with my friends over a meal or maybe even drinks. And the easy thing about going out for drinks is that I don't necessarily have to order an alcoholic drink. When it came to drinking, I didn't make a strict rule of cutting out drinking, but I always checked in with myself on whether or not I really felt like having a drink that night. And most times I just didn't, and I would order a seltzer water or some other non-alcoholic drink. I think that was one of the harder parts, was being willing to be like the odd one out when most of my friends were partaking. And I'll talk more on this later. At a certain point, I started thinking about what the experience of being at a restaurant or at a bar with a friend really provided me. And I found that I was really just paying for the space to hang out with a friend and deepen a relationship, which then made me think like, okay, how can I replicate this on a level where I don't feel pressure to spend money? And that's when I started inviting my friends over for dinners or like baking nights or just for tea and a chat. And on a monetary level, if I was cooking for a friend, I probably spent around the same amount of money as going out to eat. But the difference was they didn't have to spend money, or like they could bring ingredients that I would use in whatever I was making. And it's not that I never went out to eat again. Like if the purpose made sense to me, like if I was celebrating someone or I just felt like it with a friend and I had determined that it was worth it, then I would go, like no problem, no guilt. Nothing. I found that cutting down on material expenses was much easier for me personally than the social expenses. And what it really came down to was a question like, if I had been living without it for my whole life, did I really need to start using it now? For the majority of things, I found that when I asked myself this, I didn't really feel a need to purchase it. Most of the material things I purchased were either gifts or to replace something that I had used to a point that I couldn't use anymore. But even those were quite few and far in between. Cutting down on material purchases was easier because also at the time, I knew that everything I didn't purchase would ensure that I could continue to extend my financial runway as much as possible. So to me, it was a no-brainer. One extra month of runway versus an accumulation of clothes that I probably wouldn't care about that much in a year was just an easy choice for me. Living with fewer things is always relative, but I found that when I had fewer items to deal with, it made for a much simpler life. It's less decision making, less maintenance, less effort in getting rid of things that I don't or won't use. And I felt this particularly when I left New York. I found myself having to make a bunch of little decisions on whether to keep or get rid of things that were perfectly usable, but that I also didn't use every single day. So like, was it worth shipping across the country? And overall, it's not like I prohibited myself from ever spending money again. I still spent money when I felt like it, like on small treats for myself that I felt were worth it to me. I also didn't really track my money too closely because I trusted that I could make the right decision for me with my goals in mind. And I also still wanted to be generous, but also generosity equals minus money. And I felt like if I was tracking my money really closely, I would feel very limited in how much generosity I could show. I found that the hardest parts were probably cutting back on spending in social situations where spending money was the default. So for me, that primarily revolved around going to bars, as I mentioned earlier. At the time, separately, I decided to cut down on my drinking because I wanted to give myself the best chance at succeeding in these 2 years off of working a corporate job. And it wasn't strict by any means, but if I didn't think that it would increase my enjoyment of that particular night, then I wouldn't partake. But the first few times I did it, it would feel so weird for a waiter to come around and take orders and for me to order a seltzer water while like the rest of the table ordered something alcoholic. And there were a couple times where I almost folded to my self-inflicted peer pressure. And I say self-inflicted because my friends would never judge me for not spending money on alcoholic beverages. But I distinctly remember in one particular instance where a friend ordered a non-alcoholic drink, and that made me feel so much more comfortable in ordering my seltzer water. So you never know if you might be the positive influence for someone else when you stick to your boundaries. But speaking of which, enforcing these personal boundaries really helped me flex the muscle of setting social boundaries. In social settings, the few times I ever felt pressure to spend more than I was comfortable with, I would say, I'm like, sorry, my budget for this is around X dollars. And then I would propose some alternatives so that I wouldn't be a bottleneck to whatever we were trying to do. Because ultimately, I don't want to be in a situation that makes me feel bad. If I felt I overspent in a social setting, it would just make me not enjoy that social setting. So then in that scenario, any amount of money I spent would be a waste of money for me, because I just wouldn't have enjoyed that scenario, if that makes sense. Honestly, those practices have taught me that setting boundaries, despite discomfort, helps me have a better life overall. If I feel an urge to set boundaries, but I don't, then I will go through that interaction and come out of it not feeling great. Why would I spend my time not feeling good? I feel like the boundaries serve as a way for me to share with my friends what my principles are. And at the end of the day, we all want the best for each other. And in general, I feel like they and I have always been very understanding and respectful of each other's boundaries. Everyone's low-buy journey will be different because we're all tempted by different categories of purchases. If your goal is to quit your job or to save for something specific, it does take a lot of advanced planning. And part of that planning probably involves examining your purchases and considering which items you don't really need to buy. And then setting that boundary for yourself and sticking to it. It's not the easiest thing, especially when we live in a culture of overconsumption. But if your end goal is worth it to you, then it's worth flexing this muscle of practicing setting and sticking to your own boundaries in service of your end goal. If you're considering going on your low buy journey, I'm curious to know what your biggest hurdle might be right now. And as far as my Chanel bag, I don't regret that purchase at all. I stand by the fact that I had to make a really egregious purchase to learn this lesson. And I also don't mean learning my lesson in a negative way. It just made me realize that at this point in my life, I don't need a lot of material things because I happen to value other aspects of my life more, like financial freedom and the ability to pick up my life and move to wherever I want at a moment's notice simply because I want to. And also on a separate note, from my 2+ years of researching luxury bags, I learned a lot about fashion, about bag quality, and styles that keep their value. I also learned about classic styles versus trendy styles, and in some ways became more confident in developing my own sense of style from this research. And I point blank still love the bag. I love wearing it. I worked really hard to get to a point where I could easily afford it, and I was very intentional with the purchase. So for all intents and purposes, I did everything I could have to make sure that it was a good purchase for me. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you liked this video, I think you would be really interested in my video on why financial literacy is self-respect.